All right, everyone can see that? Okay. Uh, it's pivoting industries. And in my case, I pivoted from tech to trucking and sales. So let me tell you a little bit about my background. I have, like Larry, I have a background in sales and also was getting a little tired of sales. And a friend of mine was in recruiting, suggested moving into that. And so I started in recruitment as a freelancer because I needed to get some experience there. And I started recruiting salespeople since that's what I knew. And um, and also fortunately had a friend who was managing a sales call center. So that was great. Had a first client right there and was able to just sort of intuitively know what to look for. And, so I was doing the job. Um, and then I went into tech recruiting. So I started in agencies. Then I moved to an RPO where I recruited for IBM and Deloitte on their tech teams. Then I was recruited by Meta as a sourcer for their machine learning engineers. And then unfortunately, I was laid off and I joined Meta as as a sourcer. Oh, sorry. Hold on. My bad. So yeah, then I got laid off and I joined an RPO and was assigned to Messer, which is a industrial medical gas company. And so I was recruiting for trucking and salespeople mostly recruiting truckers, inside sales, also some other blue collar roles such as forklift drivers, people, general warehouse help, also a bit of admin ops, but mostly it was truckers and sales. So I'm going to be talking about how I pivoted there. And this is the last time you're going to see graphics here because I'm a recruiter, not a graphics guy. Okay. Um, So here's my advice for how to pivot industries. Particularly if you're a tech recruiter, there's a lot of us, unfortunately, on the job market right now. Um, so remember that the principles and habits of recruiting are universal. Um, Always keep this in mind. Always have faith in your skills, and remember that your skills are transferable. That this is universal. And start by listing the obvious stuff. I think maybe we overlook some of the obvious stuff. We assume that, of course, a recruiter for recruiters is going to know that we've done sourcing, going to know that we've dealt with hiring managers, and so on and so forth. But there's so many hundreds of applicants out there. It's such a competitive market. We can't take this for granted that and save these kinds of relevant information for a call and take it for granted that they're going to see those keywords or aren't looking for those keywords, I should say, on our CV. List your sourcing, list your screening, list any sort of sourcing exercises and workshops that you've done. Um, Talk about your rec load and your KPIs. Talk about how much experience you have doing full cycle, or sometimes it's called end-to-end recruitment. Also list any sort of experience you have with DEI. If you did DEI learnings, if there were DEI goals where you worked, if you took part in discussions and workshops, and so on and so forth. And so really just think about your day, what you did in your day-to-day work. Don't overlook the forest for the trees. You know, Talk about your day-to-day stuff. Don't overlook the obvious. And then the last advice I would have for this is to mirror the job ad. So if you need to tweak your CV, I don't list ATSs that I've used standard on my CV. That to me is a little too obvious. That would be a like listing, that I've experienced with Microsoft Word. But sometimes you see a job ad that says that too. You must have experience with G Suite. So in those cases, I'm going to tweak it. I'm going to say, yeah, I have experience with G Suite. I have experience with Zoom. I have experience using this ATS. So be prepared to tweak your resume for different stuff. Um, but that's the basic idea. Concentrate on the really basics of recruitment and not on anything that's too industry specific. And also put as much detail as possible on your LinkedIn profile. Have it mirror your resume as much as possible. Um, I think a lot of people out there don't have as much detail on their LinkedIn profile as they should. And there are people out there who have approached me, and I've gotten a lot of interviews that way, people finding me on LinkedIn that I didn't even know were looking. I didn't see their LinkedIn job ads, but they found me. So put a lot of detail on your LinkedIn. Really beef up your resume as much as you would your profile, sorry, as much as you would your resume. Okay, the next area, excuse me, is interview advice. So our big advantage as recruiters is that we know how to interview and we know what we're going to be asked. So we can't anticipate these kinds of things. So what are you going to speak to? You're going to speak to your sourcing, your rec load, your KPIs, your end-to-end recruiting or full cycle recruiting, how you dealt with clients and hiring managers, and prepare to answer answers for all these areas using the STAR method. So STAR means situation, task, action, result. But I really boil it down to STAR method, or you could maybe say even TAR method, because to me, situation and task is kind of redundant. So just situation, what did you do? What was the outcome? You know, or if you're not great with acronyms, you could also just think of it as those kinds of questions that you get, which are tell me a time when, or what would you do if? Those are the kinds of questions you get over and over in interviews. So what are the kinds of questions that we get over and over as recruiters? Tell me a time when you had a hard rec to fill. Tell me a time when you had a difficult hiring manager or you're working with a tricky client. Tell me a time when you had to get creative with sourcing. What are some tools that you've used aside from, the obvious LinkedIn Recruiter or the obvious maybe Indeed for blue collar recruiting? Um, and tell them about the hardest rec that you filled. Find something that hits on all these things. The client wanted like that purple monkey, and they had an unrealistic idea about the market, how many people were out there, plus what they could pay, plus what qualifications this person was going to have, and tell them about how you had to really take a consultative approach with this hiring manager or client, had to walk them through it, had to show them the market, had to show them the numbers, had to present them with a lot of different candidates and weigh what they were going to maybe compromise on to try to find someone and finally hire someone. So even if that question doesn't come up, find a way to shoehorn it in there. Tell them about the hardest rack you had to fill, and that's a generic kind of thing that can speak to any industry that works in interviews. And have good questions for them, of course, but don't overthink it. And what I mean by don't overthink it is I think that you read a lot of advice where you have to come up with something, a very personal, very niche question, just for that company that's interviewing you. And sometimes people maybe go down the rabbit hole a little too much. Like, of course, visit their company site, and if something jumps out at you right on the first page or right on the latest press release on the latest, right at the top of the news page, then by all means, of course, ask about that. You want to ask something about the company, of course. But what I mean is the recruiter you're talking to really going to know the something nitty gritty about their business strategy or about the latest tech they're using? I'm not too sure. Like my experience when I've worked at larger companies, I didn't know what was going on in the silo next to me. So I knew about my stuff, and my hands were full doing that. Just didn't have time to know everything that was going on at a Deloitte, at an IBM, at a Meta. So that's what I mean about don't overthink it. It's good to have just generic questions too, and there are generic questions that will still impress an interviewer. So here's a couple that I like to go to. What tools are you going to use? This is also stuff that you want to know anyway. That's the other part of don't overthink it. You want something, it's a sincere question, something that you need to know that's going to help you as well, and is going to make them have to sell you a little bit too. So what tools? You don't want to end up recruiting for something like, tech, finance, or maybe engineering and not have the tools to find those types of people. You don't want to, not have a recruiter license or hire easy, something like that. If you're doing blue collar recruiting, you want an Indeed license or some other more generic job board like that. And another question I always like to ask, what do they like about working there? And I can tell by the reaction that I get when I ask that, a lot of them don't get that question. And it kind of puts them on the spot a bit, right? If they have to think a lot about it, that's a little strange, right? They should have some reason that they can think of off the top of their head, even if they haven't got that question before. So they're selling you on the company. They're bragging about their company. It kind of works both ways. So that's a question that I really like to use. Okay, last slide. I think I'm like way ahead for time, but that's cool. So here's some extras you want to think about too. You want to think about some of the extras that are going to help you stand out. Again, not industry specific things. Languages. Do you speak other languages? Are you bilingual? Now, I'm in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and everyone in Quebec speaks French. So I mentioned that I speak French right at the top of my CV. And to get back to some of the things I was mentioning before, now right at the top of my CV, I mentioned how many years I have recruiting for specific industries, and how many years I have in full cycle recruitment. So, if you're in the US, Spanish is a great language to have. If you're recruiting for certain regions or certain industries, maybe you want to say if you speak Mandarin or some other Asian language. So that I think is always good to mention if you speak other languages. Do you have experience with international or cross-country recruitment versus regional or really knowing the local market? And depending on the job, one or the other might be a plus. But if they are expecting somebody with international experience or national experience, probably going to mention that in the job ad. But if they also want somebody with really intense, really niche knowledge of a local market, they might say that in the job ad too. So again, that goes back to tailoring the resume. And now maybe you're pivoting into an industry that you don't have experience in recruiting in, but you might have experience having worked in it. Like I worked in sales. So I would mention that I have experience in that. I pivoted into Messer. As I said, it was truckers. I have a friend who recruits for Penske. So he's done a lot of trucker recruitment. So I mentioned that. And I mentioned that with any other job where it's going to be about logistics hiring. So do you know recruiters in that industry? And that goes to some of the talks we had here talking about networking. And again, so networking, do you go to networking events? Do you belong to industry groups? Have you taken initiative to learn about the industry or the client? Do you keep up on the industry news? Do you visit their site? And so to wrap up again, keep in mind the principles and habits of recruiting are universal. So have faith in your skills. I know that it's a grind. I know that it's tough. I'm out of work and I've been out of work since start of November. It is a grind, but have faith in your skills that they're transferable, that they apply to a lot of different industries, and make sure that your resume and your LinkedIn profile reflect that. And lastly, connect with me. I'm David Schultz in Montreal. I'll drop my URL in the chat.